Hey guys, Jane here, and in this Nanoprepmo video, we're going to be talking about conflict in stories. Last year I did a lot of basic videos on things like making character sketches, plotting. I will link those below because I think they're good to revisit, but one of my viewers reached out to me and said, hey, could you do a thing on conflict? So I thought, yes, let's talk about conflict, especially as we are outlining and prepping for NaNoWriMo. So conflict is what makes a story move forward. And most main characters are going to be experiencing two types of conflict. They're going to be experiencing external conflict, which is conflict that comes at them from outside of themselves. It can be the villain of the story. It can be the society that they're living in. It can be another person. Anything that is not internal to them is an external conflict. An internal conflict is a conflict inside of them. It could be their feelings, their belief systems, their ideas, their past trauma, anything like that. It could be, for instance, if they don't feel like they're worthy of love, or they had their heart broken and so they don't want to love again. It could be their thoughts and feelings about the value system they grew up with and whether they still agree with that value system and what that means to their life. As a matter of fact, one of my characters in my NaNoWriMo project is going through that internal conflict. She is a woman who has learned that she cannot have babies, and she is trying to figure out what that means to her. What it means to her as somebody who was raised, who wants children and who was raised to believe that that was part of her role as a woman, and how she feels about that and the changes in her feelings about her value as a person because of this thing. So most of your characters who are main characters are going to have both external and internal conflict, and those things are going to be resolved over the course of the story. Generally, the external conflict is going to be related to your plot. Your character is going to get into issues with things along the way and people basically dumping boulders as they're trying to reach their goal. And that is going to be your plot, is how they overcome those things. And your plot is mostly going to be your external conflict. Your character arc and the changes your character goes through that change them from the beginning of the story to the end of the story is typically going to be internal conflict, and it's going to be your character arc. So my character starts the beginning of the book unsure how she feels about her place as a woman and in society because she can't have babies, and at the end ends up married and okay with the fact that, babies aren't for her. This is part of, the way things are, her fate, the universe, and it has been a way for her to get to where she is. And she is grateful almost for that, even though it has been a source of internal conflict. So when you do your character sketches, I recommend having a place at the bottom for both the internal and external conflicts your characters are going to be facing. And then when you get to the middle of your manuscript, a lot of times that's where it's the hardest to write. You can look back at the external conflicts and internal conflicts and really focus on those two things. You can add external conflicts. For instance, if your person is on an adventure quest, they can be having difficulty and more things thrown at them to get in their way of the questing. But this is also a great place to explore the internal conflicts, and to really have external conflicts that can alter the way your character's internal conflicts are progressing. Things outside of themselves. A date that goes really bad in my character's case, or a situation where she meets somebody else who can have children and has done other amazing things with her life. And so she kind of can look at that and say, my value as a woman, as a person, is not destroyed because I can't have babies. And maybe that's somebody who's going to throw conflicts in the external conflicts, or who's going to, help her out of the external conflicts. You want to combine internal and external conflicts as much as humanly possible, because that will make your story interesting. A lot of times, if people read a story and say this didn't have a plot, they're meaning you didn't have enough external conflicts. And if it says you didn't have enough character development, they mean you didn't have enough internal conflicts. Your character wasn't growing, they weren't changing, they weren't a different person at the end of your story, and they didn't have enough going on inside of them to really connect as a fully fleshed out character. So be aware from the get-go what your character's internal conflicts are throughout the book. And again, that's going to be your plot mostly. It is going to be, my character wants this. This is the thing standing in their way of getting that. Whether it is the society or the villain, or, the mountain that they have to climb and surpass, or the marathon that they have to run, and the fact that they're out of shape. Whatever that is, you'll have the external conflicts, and then you'll have a place for the internal conflicts. This is how my character changes. At the beginning of my story, my character is struggling with courage. They feel like they're faking their courage. They feel like they're unlovable. They feel like whatever. They're struggling with past trauma. And all of those things will move along. And you can kind of plot them on a graph too. You should be having changes. Basically, at the beginning, this is how things start out. Your person is as far away from meeting their external goal and at their, least changed self. And then as your line is progressing for the external conflict, you should have a very similar line for the internal conflict. So as they are learning to run the marathon or climb the mountain, they are getting self-esteem, learning about themselves, learning that they really are brave. Whatever it is, those two arcs should be running very similar throughout the story. And again, especially in the middle, if you start to feel like you're running out of ideas, look at where you are in those arcs and try to throw things in for those two things and maybe alternate them. That is important for main characters, point of view characters. Let's say that to make main characters distinct. Point of view characters. Secondary characters don't have to have both internal and external. They can, and that makes them more interesting. But they should at least have one. Every character who is anybody should have at least one conflict that we are seeing, whether it's external or internal. And our villain or antagonist should also have one. Our antagonist should have an obvious external conflict and internal conflict as well. The more complicated our villains are, the better they are. One example of this is Magneto from the X-Men. Magneto, obviously his physical conflicts is the other mutants and the humans, but he has this difficult past, and he's trying to figure out his belief system. Does he believe that Charles Xavier is right and that humans can live with mutants even after what he witnessed in the concentration camps? Or does he believe that even though that's a great idea, it's not real, it's not practical, and so he can't live that way. He can't risk another Auschwitz happening, and he'd rather take his people to a different place, either depending on what world you're looking at, either like the one X-Men movie, turn everybody into mutants so that we can't have the massacres, or take everybody to Avalon, and separate the humans from the mutants, or what is that internal conflict? And again, it can change. Magneto was the leader of the New Mutants at one point. And then, so he was part of Xavier's group. He was Xavier's best friend. And then you have the conflicts that separated them. And that sometimes the internal belief system conflicts can cause external beliefs and external changes. So you need to be aware as you're writing how the changes of who your character is might create external conflicts. If your character, for instance, is concerned about, as in mine, is concerned about, who they are as a woman and their fertility, that might change their relationships. It might change their relationships with their family, who might be pushing some old school values on them. That, as a woman, that's what she has to do. Maybe they're pushing her to adopt a baby or telling her that that's what she can do to be fulfilled or be, a teacher. And maybe that's the path she was trying to go on, but decides, that's not really where my passion lies. And just because I'm a woman, taking care of babies isn't the only thing I can ever do. And that will cause external conflict. So the more you can intermingle internal and external conflict, and again, you're going to have an arc of these that is like a rainbow. Think of it as a rainbow, with the top being the external and the bottom being the internal. The more that happens along your story, the better your middle is going to be, and the better your book will be overall. So thank you, Sarah, so much for that question. I hope I answered kind of the difference between internal and external conflict and the way we should be using them as we are plotting our NaNoWriMo stories. This is Jane. If you have any other questions, anybody, please leave them below or send them to me privately on any of my social medias listed below. See you next time.